There we go.
So
Over
we're
to
on 53 now. So we'll start now. People no doubt join it and leave throughout. So welcome everyone. And it's been 3 years since we held this one exactly this time this week 3 years ago. And it's all about the lower 15 restructure. So 3 years ago, as we all know, the RFU restructured their leagues and they went to more a regionalised approach, giving the playing offer on localised based on a player survey, so-called player survey the year before, and there was various working parties set up the RFU to look at what is right in regards to the playing offer, localized leagues, and the playing offer going forward for the next 3 years. There was a 3-year review period, which is why some of you are asking why are we holding this now when a vote was placed 3 years ago. And the simple answer is there's also been a change of landscape over the last 3 years. There's been a massive increase in the walkover rate of lower 15s, a slight increase in the walkover rate of the lower RFU leagues. There has been a significant change as well in the lifting of level 6. So 3 years ago, when CBs voted to allow lower 15s into the RFU leagues, it was always going to be capped at level 7. There's been a change this year where the ceiling has now been lifted to level 6. So if a second lower 15 team gains promotion from their CB level 7 this season, they can go up to the regionalised leagues, which is regional 2, which will be the new cap. And I believe that cap will be in place for until the next review. Is all that can be said on that, or guarantee wise on that. Before we start, I'm just going to hand over to Andrew Smart, who runs competitions for Middlesex. He's also the Middlesex RFU councillor, and he sat on various RFU competitions, implementation working parties over the last 2 years since his role as a Middlesex councillor. I would just like to update by the current landscape and why we are where we are now. Andrew, do you want to come on, introduce yourself? And
Well, if I can. Can you hear me? Yeah. Thanks very much for inviting me, Tyrone. Just to explain why I'm here. Obviously, Middlesex have got 10 clubs that play outside of CB boundaries and play in Surrey. And the vote in Middlesex and Surrey could well impact on those clubs. So I would have liked to have come on the meeting anyway. Just quickly to explain my background. So I'm chairman of a level 8 club in Middlesex. As Tyrone said, I chair competitions in Middlesex. I ran the vote in Middlesex, in fact, 2 years ago, in 2022. I sit on the Adult Competitions Management Subcommittee, and I chair the organising committee, which has responsibility for the day-to-day running of all league rugby from level 3 downwards. And I was asked to be part of the FCS review that took place last year before it went to council, and this year before it went to council in July, where we looked at some of the issues that had happened over the previous 2 years and made the decisions in relation to extending the ceiling from level 7 to level 6. And there was a couple of other changes. So I've been part of the process that's led us here. And we're obviously running our own vote in Middlesex. We had our all clubs meeting on Monday night. There were similar issues in relation to clubs getting onto the link. But if I make 2 comments about our meeting, one was that the level of knowledge across the CB I thought was very high, probably understandable in view of the fact that we'd only held it 2 years previously, and most of the same clubs are involved in the voting process as would have been a couple of years ago. So I thought it was a well-tempered meeting. We're combined with Hertfordshire, and that causes its own problems. Hertfordshire have told us categorically that if we again vote out, they will remove their clubs from the Herts and Middlesex competitions, or the Herts and Middlesex counties leagues, and they will run their own. Leagues, and ultimately, if that is the case, and we vote out, we will have to run our own league. So I thought it was really important that we engaged with Hertfordshire the whole way through the process, that we were extremely transparent, and we invited their president, their chairman, their competition chair, and also their council member, all who attended. And there were a couple of clubs from Hertfordshire who are right on the border of Middlesex who also requested to be part of the meeting. So I think, so just to give a little bit of background then in relation to how we've arrived here, obviously there was a previous vote. 9 of the 14 CBs voted in the last round of votes. 9 of those CBs achieved the 66% or 66.6% that was required to allow them to opt out of allowing lower 15s into the system. I'm just making these points. I don't want you to take anything from them. All 14 CBs that voted actually all voted against the introduction of lower 15s, but 5 of them didn't reach the relevant threshold. And unfortunately for us, Hertfordshire also didn't reach the threshold. They reached 64%. One more club voting the other way, and we wouldn't be having this discussion now. So anyway, after a couple of years, it was decided, and it had already been decided, that there would be a further review to look at the impact of lower 15s coming into our systems in those parts of the countries that were allowed, and to decide whether or not there should be a future vote in relation to those CBs that had voted out. A couple of other things that, as Tyrone mentioned, the first is that one of the things we did agree on, and it would be fair to say that we had a lot of meetings, and there wasn't, we weren't by any means in total agreement with each other. There was some fairly fixed positions that didn't change. But one of the things that we did decide on is that the ceiling that currently be held at level 7, which is counties 1, would be extended to level 6. And this was to allow a number of strong lower 15s who had won their leagues in the previous 2 seasons the opportunity to move up and allow the first 15s playing in that league more of an opportunity to get promoted. So that was the first decision. The second decision, which was again quite a big change, was to allow lower 15s in CBs who said no the opportunity to play in CBs, to play league rugby in CBs that had said yes. So in the first round of voting a couple of years ago, as Middlesex said no, none of our clubs that wanted to allow their lower 15s to play in the leagues were allowed for their sides to play elsewhere. That's now been changed, and I think that's fair. Just because the CB has taken or does take a decision not to allow second 15s into the leagues that they run should not stop those clubs that want their lower 15s to play in the leagues the opportunity to do so elsewhere. So I think those are the big 2 changes. The reason that we've come for a review, I think, is there has been a change in the landscape. There are plenty of lower 15s that are playing in the leagues, and some quite successfully. And I believe firmly that I have a responsibility, as Tyrone does, and as you to your own clubs, I have a responsibility to every single one of my Middlesex clubs to allow them the opportunity to put their case again, especially those that had put their case in 2022 and been rejected by the other clubs. So that's been part of the process. So far it's been very well managed. That's the wrong word. It's been very civil. People have asked some very intelligent questions. Some of the same issues that came up in 22 have come up again, and they need to be addressed. But personally, and that's why I voted for it, both first in the FCS and secondly on council, I believe absolutely that clubs should have the opportunity to vote again. And that's basically where we are. And I don't want to cut across your meeting, but if anybody's got any questions. Oh, the second thing, just one other thing. There was 9 on the FCS group, 1 from each of the regional organising committees, myself representing the organising committee, and a guy called Mike Hyman, who was chairman of competition development. There was Stephen Pearson, who was the chair, and there was a couple of RFU staff as well that made up the 9. But one of the other people that was on that was Paul Asprey, who has been chairman of London. and represents London on the RSC, and he's also on this call. So if there are any questions about the process or how we arrived in it, either of us will be able to answer that. I hope that's sufficient, Tyrone. As you
Thank
know,
you, Andy. Yes, very much so. Does anyone have any questions to Andy? Nope. Looks like you got away lightly. Thank you, Andy. Thank you. So back in 2022, when we carried out the last vote, we had 66 eligible clubs, 64 voted, and 89% of those 64 voted no to not allow lower 15s into the leagues. So we are 3 years on. We've lost 3 voting clubs through the demise of Old Tonbridgians, Old Dundelians, and another club that lost their voting right for not playing enough games. So we're down to 61 voting clubs. Where we currently are, we have 4 clubs, Surrey Clubs, playing in the national leagues, 14 in the regional leagues between Regional 1 and 3 separate Regional 2 on geographical ranging. We've got 53 clubs between Surrey, the 4 Sussex, and the Middlesex, 9 Middlesex clubs spread across the leagues. So that's 53 across 5 Surrey leagues. Besides that, there are 82 reserve teams playing across 7 CB leagues, of which the top end goes from the Raging Bull Shield down to the London and South Coast Premiership, Championship Alliance, all the way down to 8-team leagues in the foundation level, where teams effectively are put in leagues and can arrange their own fixtures on proposed dates, but not compulsory dates. We have 30 vets teams and 24 teams who take part in the under-22 competition, which is transition youth out of Colts into senior rugby. We're averaging, unfortunately, at the moment, about a 70% completion rate. So every week there are 30% of games cancelled. Last week was slightly lower. It was at 67%. Over the last 12 years, we've lost 10 voting clubs from Surrey and 102 teams that take part in the teams, from second team all the way down to where some clubs used to run 6. So it's an ever-changing landscape. It's certainly a challenge getting the players out and the teams out. So really, it's what we're here for today, is to look at various options, discuss various options, what work, and then talk you through the timeline of what the lower 15 vote is. Is there any questions before we talk through the timeline? Or would anyone like to make any comments? Be quite a quick meeting otherwise.
Ty.
Hi. Can you say your club? Yeah, I know you are. Do you mind saying your club and what league you're playing?
Yeah. JC from Croydon RFP. We are in Surrey 5. So really low. I think, is that level 11?
Level 11. Yes.
So I mean, that's we do have some ideas, some strong ideas about this proposal in the club. But I really would appreciate to hear from the different clubs the pros and the cons for this proposal. And as well, it would be interesting to hear any feedback from other counties who voted for this proposal, and see how it went for the other counties. I guess, I mean, for us, because our first team is so low in the system, that we are really worried, even if we play against a second team of much higher club than us. It's down to players' integrity, really, because we all know how it goes. If a player for first team, feel a bit tired or something, and he's going to play in the second team, he's going to play against us. So we might play against players who are maybe 5, 6 level above us. So that's definitely one big concern.
Sure.
But
okay.
on the other side, obviously, we understand that having maybe, well, we suffer a lot from on our away games, like when we have to travel an hour and a half away from home. it's quite difficult to get the players signing off for the Saturday. So maybe, going for this proposal, we might be able to have leagues with teams closer to home, which would facilitate us definitely to get availabilities.
Sure. Do you want me to jump in there, JC? But summarising
Yeah.
what you said, obviously you're currently playing level 11. You're one team club. Previously, we've been a 2 or 3 team club. Less players than what you previously had, and obviously some of the biggest challenges for you is around travel away. So the whole idea 3 years ago, and where we currently are now, and I'm going to invite John Inverdale to come in and speak in a second. But essentially, the whole idea of the new leagues is about having localized leagues, less travel, and obviously, if the vote did not result in 2/3 of clubs voting no, then all it would allow is clubs then, they don't automatically enter. Clubs still have to apply to enter against a set criteria. And they have to demonstrate that the team they're looking to enter, whether it be their seconds or their thirds, hit a certain percentage of games played against other qualifying teams last season. We would look at where we would enter teams. So the highest they could enter is Counties 1, which is level 7. But equally, it could cascade in all the way through the leagues. Now, it wouldn't result, and hopefully can hit off a question from one of you, wouldn't be a result in full-scale relegations. There's an option from counties 2 and below to have mirrored leagues, West and East, having localised teams at the same competitive level playing against each other, which still results in localised travel, not travelling right across the county to play each other. But we can cover that later on. So I'm just going to hand over to John at the moment. We'll take some more questions in a bit, but I've asked John. Then John is also an RFU councillor. He's the National League councillor, and he's also been involved in a couple of the implementation working groups before the previous restructure. And John, over to you.
Thanks, Ty. Yeah, I mean, hello, everybody. This is an unbelievably important issue. I mean, it really is, in terms of participation at a time when the sport obviously has got huge issues across many levels. I think one of the key things here is a uniformity of approach across the whole game. That's what I feel is unbelievably important for the game as a whole, but for players, for fans, for people involved, for volunteers, for everything else, to know where they stand. And also, I think there's a lot of misinformation that gets spread about lower 15s in the pyramid and elsewhere. I mean, this has been happening I was brought up in the Southwest and played rugby down there. It's been happening for 30, 40 years down there without anybody batting an eyelid. Obviously, that was pre-leagues, but nonetheless, it's ancient. I'm ancient as Methuselah. But the thing is that it's been a regular thing in certain parts of the country, and it's been massively a boon to the game. So all I would like to say is, when this came in a couple of years ago, a lot of data has been taken over the last couple of years, which shows that since the lower 15s came into the pyramid, if you want to call it that, there has been greater participation across the board. Players fundamentally want to play, this is very generic, I know, but players want to play in a more structured environment. There is greater match completion, irrefutably. And there is one of the great things, and I do think this is one of the urban myths that's been allowed to gather momentum. There is no evidence of super clubs developing by stealing players from all over the place. It just doesn't happen. Over the years, good players migrate to a higher level to see if they can crack it. If they can't, they go back where they came from or they go somewhere else. But there is absolutely no evidence of that happening. There really isn't. There are less one-sided matches as well, which I think is important. That the gulf between, I think it's down 6 points a game, which may not sound much, but across the whole framework of the leagues, I think the margins of victory have been much closer. I totally accept that responsibility rests with the league conveners, if you want to say that, who formulate these new structures. But I think sometimes, you have to trust people within the game. And I firmly believe, for the good of the sport as a whole, at a very difficult time for all of us, we, as in Surrey, have to follow the overwhelming majority of the country and approve this, so that we have a uniform approach for the sport, from Hadrian's Wall to Land's End. And the key thing here, just to back up what was said earlier, there's no compunction about anybody to do this. You know, if we approve this, you don't have to do it. Nobody has to do it. But it's important, I think, to give people the freedom of choice to do what they feel is better for their club, because there's not one size fits all here. And I really do hope that I mean, the two biggest counties who are standing out against this at the moment are Surrey and Yorkshire. I'm led to believe that Yorkshire are going to reverse their decision from a couple of years ago, and they will approve lower 15s playing in the leagues. I think it would be an anomaly, and not an anomaly that Surrey would be proud of, if Surrey was standing out against the rest of the game. Thanks, Ty.
Thank you, John. Andy, are you still on, Andrew Smart?
Sorry, just before we switch over, so there's been a question in the chat from Duncan around, is it possible to see the data that you referred to, John?
Yeah.
I mean, it's out there in all forms. I mean, you know, I haven't got it to hand, but it's very easy to access. Yes, I can. It can be got, no problem.
And this data has been presented to the RFU councillors as such, showing that since the restructure, that there's been a drop in percentage of walkovers, higher completion rate, and closer games.
Yeah.
Is there a way you could send a link in the chat or anything to show us?
I haven't got it to hand at the moment, and the hierarchy. I'm not going to contact them now at 8 o'clock on a Monday night. But if I can send it to Tyrone and he can distribute it to the all those on the call.
Yeah.
Okay, James Tapson, I've got a question. What happens to promotion if a second 15 is entered into a league that already has a full complement of teams? Will league sizes expand, or will promotion rules be changed for season prior? So that's already very flexible. So this season, even without this vote, up to 6 teams could be relegated from the regional leagues into Surrey Sussex 1, because it's filtered into 3 leagues in the regional 2s, and worst case scenario 2, 2 and 2 from each of the 3 regions. So already 6 teams could be relegated from regional 2 into Surrey Sussex 1, and if the second place in Surrey Sussex 1 didn't get one of the highest percentage of win ratios in the country, could also result in up to 8 teams being relegated from Surrey Sussex 1 down into Surrey Sussex 2. We do have the option of, as I said earlier, and that would then cascade all the way down through the leagues. We wouldn't look to make leagues bigger. The whole idea of 3 years ago was about having smaller leagues, less games with weeks off in between. So we would look to cap it at 12 teams. At the moment, we have in our Surrey leagues, we have 12, 11, 10, 10 across the 5 leagues. There is flexibility to go up to 12s if those relegations do cascade down through the regional leagues. But equally, as I referred to earlier, there is the option of going Surrey 4 East, Surrey 4 West 3, with a 2 promotion from each up if that vote was to go through. So yes, we would look at various different options. We wouldn't know just yet. So when we're voting, and we're not voting 4 options, as John referred to earlier and Andrew before that, the vote is really whether the clubs in Surrey are willing to vote for or against, allowing the option for teams, clubs to apply to be in the leagues. And I did say, there's also a set criteria of whether they'd be accepted and where they would be accepted. The ceiling at the moment to be accepted is into 7, which is counties 1. But it doesn't mean they're all placed in.
Sorry, Ty, let me do one last point, and I'll shut up. Can I just say, the key thing here, the absolute key thing here, there is no compunction for any club, whatever level they play at, to buy into this. You don't have to enter your second team in anything, or third, or fourth, or if you're lucky enough to have a 4th or a 5th to do that. It's just, I think, important to give clubs the freedom of choice to do what they feel is best, because every club has its own little issues. That's all we're talking about here. So this is not forcing people to do anything. It's just giving people the option to do something should they so choose. And that's the key thing. That really is the key thing. And in different parts of the country, There are many clubs who don't do this. Many clubs who don't do this. It's just that, if you're in, I don't know, Staffordshire, or if you're in Northumberland, or wherever it might be, you have the option to put your second team in the pyramid, or if you have good merit tables and this, that, and the other, you can continue to play in that. There is no problem with that whatsoever. This is the key thing. This is the fundamental thing about it. There is nobody is forcing anybody to do anything here. It's just giving people options.
John, question to you or Andrew while you're on. So is there an option to not put your second team in, yet put your third team in? For instance,
Yes.
You've got a couple of clubs like Richmond, Rosslyn Park, Esher, Wimbledon, who dropping down a level may be too low a level for those. So, and what's on offer for those teams with the Raging Bull? But so there is that option as well.
There is that option as well. And one of the key things here as well, I mean, sorry, that sounded like a record that's got stuck. The participation issue here is so important. It's just so important. We want as many people as possible to be playing the game at the moment. And the key thing here is all the data that's being done. And I know people keep saying on the chat line about the data. Yeah, we'll get it out there. But to you, players tend, from all the research that has been done, a friendly, a non-specific match that is not in Surrey League One or whatever it might be, I might not be available next weekend. The key so you've only got to have 5 people saying that, and the game doesn't happen. The moment you say it's a league game, we need you. Okay, I'll be available. I'll leave straight after the final whistle, but I'll be there. It leads to a much in the context of how the modern player is. It's leading to more players playing the game, more matches being fulfilled. That ultimately is what we all want, or we all should want anyway, and we all need for the good of the sport. All the time we keep reading about the Premiership and the Championship and Tier 2 and all the things that happen there. But fundamentally, we on this call are the game. We are the bedrock of the sport. And we need as many people as is humanly possible playing the game. And the evidence across the rest of the country shows that by allowing second and lower 15s to play in the pyramid, more people play, more matches get played, and as a consequence, the game is stronger.
Thank you, John. Paul Asbury, I believe you're on here without putting you on the spot. One of the questions is, what is the criteria to enter in? I know you've been involved long, Andrew, on various implementation committees.
I can bring that up on screen as well if you'd like. So let me...
I'll come to Paul Cecil and Steve Hill next after this. Thanks.
So what you're asking, what is the criteria for entry?
Yes, please, Paul.
If somebody is going to put it on the screen, that would be very helpful. I can't enlarge on that. Basically, have a first 15 already playing in the league. That's quite obvious in order to be a lower 15. The main criteria, I guess, is that you have to show that you've played 15 games in the most recent season. In other words, so you're going to come into the league with an ability to complete the league schedule and not just become the nuisance that cries off too many fixtures, which is exactly what we're trying to avoid, that is trying to be avoided.
Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing, but hopefully the criteria on the screen helps everyone.
Paul, while you're still on here, I've got a question that's coming via WhatsApp, and then I'll come to Paul Cecil and then Steve Hill, if that's all right. Can a club play a player 1 week in the first team in an RFU league, and then a week later play that same player in a league that could be 3 or 4 leagues below in an RFU league?
I believe he can, and I will quote a question that's come in on the Middlesex front, and somebody's asked a question earlier on about the chat at what was the Middlesex vote. There has been no Middlesex vote yet. That will be taking place at the same time as your Surrey vote takes place. And I believe, for example, a player who is contracted and being paid by a National League club, a level 3 or 4 club, and if he's been paid whatever he is being paid, I believe he is eligible to play for the lower 15,
Oh.
even if he is being paid more money than the threshold that is allowed at level 7. There is nothing to stop the movement of players between the leagues. That and that I have looked up to tonight, and I can't see anything to stop that happening. So,
and this is, and sorry, Paul, sorry, this is when, you know, we this sport spends a lot of time saying what a wonderful sport it is and the great integrity of the sport and everything else. This is when people will, the odd person, the odd team will cheat, but fundamentally, you have to accept the integrity of the sport. And also, by the way, if another player is being paid by whoever it might be at Wimbledon, but isn't playing very well, you can't not, if you drop him because he's not good enough for your first team, you can't not play him just in your second team.
John, I quite agree with you. I quite agree with
because
you.
Because then you're losing somebody on the player participation.
I was asked the question. I was asked.
No, absolutely. No, listen, I get it. And there is absolutely a duty of care. Absolutely a duty of care for that. And you know, the gulf between this, you know, I think it's utterly spurious to think that some player who isn't good enough to play at level 4 in a first team, dropping down to level 7, is going to be playing like Zinzan Brook playing against whoever it might be. It's not going to happen.
I agree.
These are urban myths, and we're allowing them to be propagated.
I agree. Honestly. We play a roughy-tufty game, and every now and again, everybody comes up, somebody who's a bit roughy-tuftier than you might normally come across. But that goes with the game of physical contact, and what we're talking about is, I'm with you. It happens. And there's nothing to stop that particular player. That particular player could quite easily leave the national club, register for another club, and be playing quite legitimately at level 7 by simply transferring. So
exactly.
Okay.
And in response to the thing about, you know, players being injured, playing a second team game before coming back, well, of course, because this is what we come back to. You know, the main objective here, and I hope this is the problem with this whole conversation. The main objective here has to be to get more people, or as many people as is humanly possible, playing the game. You know, that's the fundamental thing here. And so I hope that, you know, that as a general acceptance, if we could all agree on that, how we do it is a question for debate. But if we can all agree that we are all united on that as an objective, then that's a great starting point.
Thank you, John.
So I'm just going to go. I've been kind of keeping a record of who's asked questions in which order. So I'll kind of lead into the different people.
Can we bring Paul Cecil in first?
Yeah, I've got the order. So yeah, Paul Cecil is first.
Hi there, everyone. I'm calling from Old Ruts. So there's lots of good balanced chat going on here. Yeah, you know, the 10 years I've been doing it, going from like level 11, now level 7 and taking off. Our biggest issue is we lose one player a year. You know, this isn't half the team going off to a top level team, one player a year. And pretty much every other year, one of them players come back because they've not made it to the level they want. They see the existing club goes up another notch and they're not getting paid for it. So numbers wise, this isn't going to be a big issue. But from a compromise point of view, it feels a bit odd that, you know, one of my players leaves, goes to another local club in West London, and then their twos team get promoted into playing in the same league as what we're at. And, you know, and the issue that then creates with the old teammate and everything else. But, you know, it's not, you know, from where I sit, it's not like something that's going to completely, you know, transform everything that we do. But it's minimal numbers. And most of the people that one player that leaves at the end of a good year that we've done well, it's all about money and the desperation to maybe play in their first team and get paid for it. And then when they arrive at that club and end up playing in the seconds or the thirds and they get no payment, they just end up coming back. And it makes the whole transfer, the coming back look pretty daft, really. That's where I see it at Old Ruts. You know, and, you know, as I said, we're four levels up from where we were sort of 6-7 years ago. Young team, lot of good guys that should be playing for likes of Wimbledon and even maybe Isha, higher level, but they're choosing not to because they don't have the confidence that they're making that move is going to give them 5 years of money, payback, blah blah blah. They're just really happy because they see guys coming back. So yeah, so that's just my kind of business view on it really. But good mixture of appetite on the ball.
Cheers, Paul. A couple of questions that have come in via the chat, and I can answer straight away. So, if the CB did vote to allow this, walkovers received, we would take into account that as a Surrey Stroke Regional Organisation Committee when looking at the criteria. So, if you only played 11 games but received 5 walkovers, we would count those as games you intended to play. It's walkovers given that would stand against that. Another one, a second team can only go up to the league below where their first team currently play at. So if they did vote for it and they entered and the second team won 2 promotions, they couldn't go up into league where their first team were currently at. So their place would be taken as league winners below by the team in second place in that league, whether that be another second team. Sorry?
It's 2 leagues.
It's 2 league difference, is it?
Yeah.
A two league difference. Thank you for that.
Okay, I'm going to now go down the hands up in the order. So Mark Bertrand is first, and then I'll follow that with Kev.
Tyron, or whoever does the stats on this, if I'm not mistaken, out of the 6 counties won leagues in London South East, there are only 8 second teams playing in those 6 leagues currently. And I think Canterbury and Havant are the top of their leagues consistently this year and I think last year. Now, if you're playing in merit leagues, let's say, for example, let's look at the London and London Counties and South Coast, league. It's rated to be a level 7 league. But if you're to take second teams out of that league, and let's just say stick them at level 7, it's not the same level 7, let's be honest. You're playing against first teams at level 7, which will have probably a better consistency of ability and consistency than the level 7 at merit leagues. To be honest, the only sort of second teams that could really enter level 7 in the leagues for Surrey would probably be the likes of a Richmond, an Isha, a Barnes, a Wimbledon, a Dorking maybe, who are pretty much National League teams and Regional 1 teams. That's not to say that they will do well in those leagues. I think the disparity comes, and I think it was mentioned earlier on, where you've got the Raging Bull, which is deemed to be a level 5/6 league. Where you've got sort of Richmond 2s, you've got the Amtils, the Blackheaths, the Bishop Stortfords. That league has gone from having 3 consistent leagues of 10 teams down to 7 teams this season because clubs are pulling out, obviously, around the regions. They're going into the leagues. So second team rugby at a merit level is slowly eroding. Now, I do agree with John's point about if Surrey votes for this to be allowed and then the teams have the option to. My question is, are you allowed to put a third team in and skip your second team? For example, let's use the likes of Richmond as an example. Let's just say Richmond's second team is probably the strongest second team in the county for Surrey consistently. Some teams will disagree with that, but let's look at results. Now, if Richmond as a club, and I'm sure Darky's on the call here who could probably answer against this, but does that mean that Richmond could say, well, we'll leave our 2s in the Raging Bull, but we'll enter our 3. We'll skip a team and enter the 3s, where on any given weekend, if Raging Bull doesn't have a game, that those second team players end up playing in the third team. And all of a sudden you have a massive disparity and the third team is pretty much as strong as their second team. I'm not saying that's going to happen. I'm not saying that that's a club that will do that, but the opportunity is there to do it because remember, all players are registered. It's not like in the past where some players weren't registered because to be in the RFU leagues, you have to be a registered player. And it's not like you're going to have first team and third team players registered and not second team players, even though we know all players have to be club registered or RFU registered these days. I don't see many clubs in Surrey really getting in at that level 7 level, to be honest, if that's a concern. And then as what Tyron's just confirmed, you're not going to get second teams that you can never be closer than 2 leagues from your first team. So, for example, let's just say my club, Wimbledon, we're level 5. That means our second team, if we were to enter the leagues, could never go higher than level 7 currently. If we were to go back to level 4, then next season we could be at level 6, because that is what's going to be in place next year. Level 7 is the ceiling this year. Level 6 will be the ceiling next year.
Not the entry ceiling, Mark.
No. Once you've played the league, if you've won level 7,
won your league, one promotion.
Correct.
Yeah.
You'll be promoted to level 6. So that opportunity is there. I think it's a good thing and a bad thing. My disagreement with the process is that by not voting, and I put this on the group, that you're tacitly agreeing to the process. So if you are going to agree to it, actively agree to it. If you're going to disagree with it, disagree with it. But I don't think the ROC for London South East and the organising committees are going to stick strong teams and leagues where the first teams in those leagues, and I think someone from Croydon mentioned earlier on, we're just going to get absolutely pummeled and destroyed by a stronger club second team. I don't think our ROC would do that, and they would look at historical results and strengths of that club and those teams before they do that. So I think there's a pro and a con to this. I don't think following the whole country is a good example to use. I have to disagree with John on that one, personally. Just because everyone's doing it doesn't mean it's the right thing. I think it would be good to look at stats of all the second teams that have entered the leagues, and there are some clubs with second teams and third teams in the leagues, and to see where they are and consistently how they've done. Have they been promoted over the last 3 years? Have they been relegated? How many walkovers? Those stats someone can probably pull out of GMS. It's probably going to take a while, but I think you need to look at that rather than just say everyone else is doing it, so why shouldn't I?
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you. Graham, who's next up?
If we go to Kev next, and then Steve Hill will be following. You're on mute, Kev, sorry.
Sorry, Kev Keeney, President of Weybridge Vandals. So obviously I was on the call, it feels like 2 years ago, not 3 years ago, and obviously there's a reason why we voted 90% against it then. So it's obviously interesting to be brought up to speed and to hear about it. Obviously, one of the things we talked about then from clubs that are, let's call it sort of level 6, 7 and below, was actually how precious first team rugby was to those clubs. And it felt at the time, and right or wrong or not, that this was something that suited the larger clubs, so the National League clubs, because it gave their lower teams, a league rugby to play on, but it didn't necessarily suit the clubs at our level, because it diluted what it meant to play first team rugby. And that was a lot of the talk on the call. Obviously, we're now in practice, we're able to look at counties like Hampshire, who we were used to playing leagues with, and seeing teams like Havant put second teams into their leagues and what's happening. And I agree with the previous guy from Wimbledon. It would be interesting to see the stats, what's actually happened, because they were the big concerns for us. The concerns weren't about us losing players to other local big clubs, because that ultimately we always aspire to guys going and trying their best at a higher level if they want to do that anyway, and that's the natural course of rugby. And obviously we all aspire to wanting to have as many people participate as possible, but it did feel like it took away what it meant, what was special to play first team rugby at a certain level, which we think is very precious, and it didn't feel as precious going and playing Esher twos on the back pitch at Esher when the ones are playing on the ones pitch. That was a strong feeling at the time, and I'm interested to know has anything changed in that regard, other than what we know has happened in other counties. And again, I agree we shouldn't do it just because the rest of the country's done it. And I do take issue with John's point around saying we all get a choice. We don't get a choice if we're in counties one and a second team is imposed on that league because a national league team decides to enter a twos team. Well, the clubs in that league at the moment don't get a choice. You just have to accept that team alongside you. Yes, we get a choice as to whether we want to enter a second team in it, but it's not right to say every club gets a choice, because obviously, unless I'm misinterpreting that, you would be playing the clubs you're chosen to play against.
Thank you, Kevin. John, just a quick thing in regard to the two leagues. I've spoken or messaged Andrew Smart and Paul Asprey, and I do believe there is only one league now that they can be different between. So I don't want that quoted.
Okay. In that case, I'm wrong. I apologise. I thought that was the whole point. My apologies.
Yeah,
apologies, John. Yeah, I'm sorry. It is only one league, and in answer to the question in the chat, so if a lower team can't be promoted into the same league that the higher team is playing in, so it can go up to one league away. And similarly, if a higher team gets relegated, and if it gets relegated into the league, into a league where its lower 15 is playing, then that lower 15 gets relegated as well to keep the distance one apart. That's how it works. Thank you. Sorry.
Thank you, Paul.
Yeah, sorry. And if I could just say one thing about, I do this whole thing about the sanctity of the first 15. I get to a point. What I would say is, when I was growing up and playing rugby in the Midlands, the biggest match of the season for us was playing Leicester Extras, which was Leicester Tigers' second team. That was the match that we aspired to beat more than anybody else. And I think there is. I'm not sure that when players play second teams, they look at it in the light that was illustrated there.
I think that's easier when you're the bigger club saying it, John. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I get that, but
that's a very big club centric answer. That's, aren't we good?
No.
Sorry, guys,
not.
just to cut in. I'm going to make sure that everybody gets airtime and gets the opportunity to raise their questions and comments. So I'm going to come to Steve Hill next.
Yeah, gents, thanks. Over the last decade or so, I've been involved with clubs at levels 2, 3, 4, and now 5. So seeing things from a range of views. My concern, firstly, is if we carry on doing what we've been doing, we'll get the same result. We'll have less games played, more teams will drop out, and in 3 years' time, the stats will be worse than they are now. I'm very much in favour for allowing lower teams into the leagues, and the reason for that is because even talking to the players at Wimbledon, where I'm fairly new, if it was an RFU league game, and over the last couple of weeks I've had players away and whatever else, second team players away, but if it was an RFU league match and you can't get the team out or whatever else, there's a consequence for that game not taking place. And unfortunately, my experience over the last 10 years of lower teams in non-RFU leagues is it's very, very easy for teams to phone up on a Thursday and a Friday and say, oh, we haven't got this number of players, or we haven't got the right number of props, we're not going to bother playing this weekend. So you then have 27 blokes who don't play rugby that weekend. That happens 2 or 3 Saturdays out of 4. They find something else to do. They find something else to do other than hang around for rugby. Now, if you're going to lose 5 points because your team doesn't take part in the RFU league, which my understanding is the regulations, then as a coach, that's a bit of leverage that you can put on the player. His teammates can also say, look, fine, get off to the party or the birthday or the anniversary, after the match. We need you. It's a league match. And I think that's a very powerful handle for keeping those players involved. My experience, having been involved, with Richmond, etc., and is that we're not interested in the senior squad players playing in the lower teams. It was a totally different squad. So again, I think John talks about urban myths. Guys, I think that's very rarely going to happen. At the same time, I had an example this weekend of a player 2 weekends ago who was playing at level 2, re-registering and playing against us at level 5. So it happens, and it's got nothing to do with lower leagues. It was a player looking for game time, and that was at the level that he could get it at. So again, I'm very much from a view where I think it should be allowed. My background before coming to London was in Oxfordshire. Bucks, Sparks and Oxon for many, many years has had a whole range of clubs put in their seconds and thirds into the RFU leagues. And I spoke to my friends at Henley and Oxford Harlequins and Oxford Rugby Club over the last couple of weeks. It works really well. It works really well. And the message from them was, because there are RFU leagues, the players are more likely to play rather than merit tables where it's easy just to say no to the game. So, gents, thanks very much.
Thank you, Steve.
Thanks, Steve. So the next comment or question is Steve Simmons, please.
Hi guys, Steve Simmons from Oval Countyans, level 8. So apologies if this is coming at things from a sort of lower, smaller club level. I got quite excited when I saw that Surrey had called this meeting because things are tough, and I was hoping we'd have a chat about what was going to be done to help clubs like mine. And again, this is coming from my level. This seems like a proposal to help the bigger clubs. And I don't really see how this could benefit lower clubs who are going to end up playing some second team of some big club who are going to whack us. So I don't see the point or the merit or the benefit in that for a lower level club. And if we want to increase player participation, which I think we all do, Tyrone started by listing the number of clubs who've dropped out. We don't want more of that, do we? So I don't know if the bigger clubs can loan some players out. This doesn't have to be the only solution to increasing player participation. So at the risk of quoting Janet Jackson, didn't really expect to do that on this call. What have you done for me lately would seem to sum up what I'm feeling at a lower level club.
Thank you, Steve. Just to add to that, obviously my role as chair of Surrey now and competitions is with or without this vote. Bear in mind, if it went through, some clubs would apply to enter, many others wouldn't. It's to keep working with the clubs as best we can to increase that participation and get the rugby offering right and balance that between hitting teams where they don't get a team out, let the opposition down late, but also support them through innovating stuff like game on, shortened games, triangular fixtures, loaning barbarians, loan systems of other clubs. Something that we're still going to be working on, focusing on with or without where this vote goes. And that's our focus over the next 2 years.
Perfect. Thanks all. So next question or comment from Tim.
Thank you, Tyrone. Can I say I've got a huge respect for the views of Steve Hill. I don't actually know who John I is, but he's been pretty vocal, but never mind. They have both said, quite rightly, what it's all about is getting more people playing. Absolutely, that's vital. Recruit or die used to be the RFU's mantra, and I think that's what it's all about. Where I wholeheartedly disagree with John is that we should have a unified structure. Clubs are different. Areas are different. There's a huge difference between the rural and urban areas. And I think it's the urban areas where travel is much less of a problem, have tended to go to not to support just first 15s playing in the leagues. Because the second 15s, I believe, can find games in merit tables reasonably locally, whereas in rural areas, that's just not possible very often. And that's why I think the rural areas, or tend to be more of them, have gone for lower leagues. I think that, well, certainly my club, founder member of the RFU, will be voting again no. We're actually a Middlesex club, but play in the Surrey leagues because of your wonderful structure. And I think there's about 77 clubs, or used to be, adjacent to the golden dual carriageways of the A3 M25. Travel's easy, and getting games is easy. In rural areas, that it just doesn't apply. And I think that we will definitely be voting no again. And I don't think letting lower teams into the lower leagues is right. I can see Paul shaking his head, but there you go. That's the view of my club. And a lot of people in Middlesex, I listened into the Middlesex meeting, and I think that that'll probably vote the same way.
Okay.
So,
Sorry, Tim, I was only shaking my head because your vote is quite irrelevant to this meeting. Your vote is a Middlesex vote and not relevant to this meeting. That's why I was shaking my head. Not.
That's why I did declare our club's affiliation.
Okay. Thank you all. So we'll go to John Crate, and then if anyone else has any further questions, can you raise your hand, and then we'll come to you next.
First of all, Ty, can I just query something that you said in your introduction? That last time around, 14 CBs voted, which 9 decided to adopt lower 15. Is that right?
I don't recall saying that.
Well, I've written it down as you said it. I mean, how many CBs did?
14. But I believe all I don't know how many CBs voted. I've been told that 9 voted against it.
No, I voted against it. All right.
Yeah.
Okay. That's so. You've got to remember that, of course, a number of those CBs already had lower 15s playing in their league. For example, Eastern Counties, and did Sussex, because the small numbers of clubs that could play in reserve leagues or merit tables. I too concerned. I think it was Kevin made the point about first 15 pitches being used for league games. I know when this first went through, it was suggested by a number of people that a club championship game, a national club championship game, must be played on the home team's first pitch. This was just sort of glossed over. As far as helping with numbers in those clubs that have difficulties with the play numbers, that will be helped this season by the fact that from level 9 and below, you will be able to be registered for more than one club. So there is the possibility to move first 15 players around if one club has an excess of them and another one has a shortage of them. At least we can get that done. I have to say, the figure that I've seen about completions of matches is better, but I wouldn't say it was dramatically overwhelming better than in previous seasons. It has improved, but perhaps not quite to the extent that John Inverdale was suggesting. That's it. But and
Thank you,
I'm
John.
happy to take phone calls from anybody over the next few days if you want clarification or anything.
Okay, so just to clarify that, so from level 9 and below, a player can register at 2 clubs at one time, but can unregister at one and then register to another one, become a second two. But a player can't register. So a Esher, Wimbledon, Richmond third team player cannot club register at those clubs, and then club register at a level 9 or below. So, in some ways that doesn't help the game either. That you're not playing first team, you'll never play first team. You're playing Esher, Wimbledon, Richmond threes, fours, or vets, but cannot RFU club register, and go and play your 9 to 11 club that need those players on a Saturday. So the current, we're not here to talk about registration tonight, I get that, but that obviously doesn't help either. I think that needs looking at next season. I get that's why there's a difference between an RFU registered that plays in the first team and club registered for those players who probably will never play first team. But that's something to look at another time. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for clarifying that, Tyrone. Good point.
So we'll just kind of pause just a minute, see if there's anyone else with any questions or comments they'd like to raise.
We got a Nick Deere. I added his name to the chat. He for some reason, couldn't put his hand up. So I put his name down.
Nick. Are you there, Nick? If you are, you're on mute.
Yeah, Kingston.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I'll be brief. So I'd like to back up what Steve Simmons said from Woolcountians, and also, forgive me, I didn't get his name from Weybridge, but I'd go further, and I'd say that the item that hasn't been discussed tonight is the draw of players away from lower position club to the lower teams of bigger clubs. Tyrone said at the start, the pool of players is smaller, and none of us want that. And none of us want to do anything that exacerbates that. But whilst that situation pertains, then we need to be convinced that this doesn't just draw players to the lower teams of bigger clubs. And I'm really disappointed and surprised that the people who are purporting this have not presented the evidence tonight to prove their point. So I came with a mandate for the committee to vote against this, and I've heard nothing to change that point. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Nick. I'll come on in a minute to talk through what the process of the vote will be. It's not a vote tonight, but I will explain what the next steps on that are. Just looking at some of the people on video, I think, Keith, you have your hand up if you want to come off mute. You're on mute. Keith? Sorry, I can see you talking, but you're on mute at the moment.
You hear me now?
Yeah, perfect.
Keith Hill, Egham Hollowegians. Surrey Rugby. I've been quite impressed with some of the comments made. And I must admit, I don't have a vote in this, but I was impressed with what John said about getting people involved in the game more. And also the fact that when you are playing against a team that isn't involved in competition or promotion, you do have players dropping out. But one thing that does concern me, and I heard earlier, that where you have the professional players who aren't playing or coming back from injury, drop down to play in the seconds or thirds, I don't agree with that. I can give you an experience of about 4 or 5 years ago where we were at the beginning of a season, and we agreed to play the thirds of another club. I'm not going to name them. And we turned up, and it just happened that their first side game had been cancelled, and we played, and we got absolutely hammered and involved in 3 or 4 injuries to players. Now, if the criteria is going to be set for when players of a higher level are going to play, then that's grand. But who's going to police it? I do have concerns, but I think if I had a vote, I most probably would say, yeah, let's give it a try. Thank you.
Thanks, Keith. Okay, final shout for any. Oh, Rich, I can see you've raised your hand now. Rich Fennick.
Yeah, good evening. I'm Rich Fennick from Barnes Rugby Club. The gentleman earlier, I think it was Nick, raised a very good point, which was he hadn't heard any representation as to why clubs should be voting for this. So I'd like to just put this case forward. At Barnes Rugby Club, we are in a fortuitous position. We do have a number of players. We have obviously a senior first team playing at level 4. We have a second team playing at level 5. And then next below that, we have a casual thirds team playing at level 10. And the challenge that we have at the moment, and will continue to increase as a problem, is we have a large cohort of former under-18s, then Colts, then under-22s, and now under-23s, who are looking for good high standard of rugby and an established player pathway. We're looking for that side to be evolved so that they could enter in at a level 7, which would be a natural progression for them from the standard that they're used to at university or through the lower sort of youth section of the club that they've been playing at. But we have a huge gap at the moment between level 10 and level 5. And that's why it's in the interest of those young players, the future of this game, that do need the league structure that John was talking about earlier, to step up and play this game. And that's why it's important for Barnes Rugby Club to see a way in which we can put in place a proper pathway for that youth section to go forward and to enter in and play at level 7.
Thank you, Richie. Just to to argue that obviously there is at the moment a lower 15 Surrey South Coast Premiership and a Championship level 7 and 8 that could give that player an opportunity if this vote can go that way, which Wimbledon 2s, Dorking 2s, Worthing 2s, Belsize Park, Civil Service already play at. So there is that available for those players that could help that pathway transition and retainment, obviously outside of this vote anyway. So do speak to us as a club, and there is that gap already there between level 4 and level 10. Thank you.
Okay, one last comment from Jean-Charles, and then I will talk through what the process and the next steps will be, and then we can follow up with any final questions.
Yeah, Graham. Well, obviously, I'm sure you've noticed my accent, and my first name says that obviously I'm partly French. I've got the passport now, but obviously in the French system, and it was suggested in the chat actually that for the top teams, the first teams play against each other, and just before the first team games, the second team play against each other. So they would have the second team would have the same level. So is that not something that which could be considered as well in England.
We certainly would look at all options, yes, and can't rule anything out. But yes, that's something that could be brought to the table to look at outside of this. Thank you, Jesse.
Perfect. Well, thank you everyone for the input. In terms of next steps, so first of all, all on-secs should have received over the last couple of weeks the email stating what the criteria is, an FAQs document, and what this process that we're talking about tonight looks like. So what we will do, we'll make sure that's reshared with those supporting documents. I think they answer some of the queries and concerns and give some clarity. So we'll make sure those are reshared when we share the vote details. The vote that we are proposing will run from the 9th of October through to the 23rd of October. So there will be a 2-week period for clubs to be able to vote. The submission that we will request from clubs will be that we have the names, email addresses, and RFU numbers of 2 golden role people at your club. And we will put a bit of an explanation in the email, so that maybe your chairman, your on-sec, your treasurer, etc. So we're just trying to make sure that we've got more than one person's name on there from each club that has agreed to put their name down to vote. We will then collate those votes on the 24th of October in preparation for a submission from Surrey back to the RFU by the deadline of the 25th. So by closing on the 23rd, it gives us a day just to mop any final votes up, chase anybody that's missing. So if you can just go on mute. There we go. So yeah, it just gives us a day to chase anybody up and close out the vote and do all the admin on it. And then we will submit on the 25th. That process is then, there will then be a notification out to clubs to inform everybody as to what the outcome has been. And at that point, it will be clear, then we'll communicate next steps. So if we are going to accept this process and allow lower 15 teams in, we will then communicate the window of time for clubs to apply, and we'll reiterate the criteria, and then it will go through to the relevant organising committees. But for now, we're not going to move to that step. It will purely be getting up to the 25th of October, and we'll share the details out at that point.
Great. And can I just jump in? It's Paul Aspie, if you're still on there. Are you able to very quickly summarise then, if it did go yes to the vote, what would be the rough timeline for clubs applying? But equally, when would we know, or when would we advise clubs on what relegation and how that could change? Because that's a critical. Paul sits on behalf of the London South East ROC on RFU and does a lot of the promotion, without putting him on the spot, promotion relegation protocols for London and South East. So, Paul, are you still on here?
Yeah, yes, I am, and I'll try and answer it briefly. If the vote was to change, and this is acknowledged, that there would quite clearly have to be restructuring of one form or another within the county leagues. Quite clearly, the new teams couldn't come in any higher than level 7, which is counties 1, Surrey, Sussex, and it would be managed by the CB, Surrey, and the regional organising committee together, who are responsible for organising and managing the leagues at that level, and they would make pragmatic decisions, and there is no set pattern for it, or the table would be clear to sit down and work out however there's a finite time for clubs, the lower 15s to enter, so it's not left until the last minute. I'm not sure of the exact dates, but it's fairly imminent. And
I've just put them up on screen, Paul, just to help.
Thank you. So it's November. That's right. So it's all going to happen during November, which means that by January, we would, and I say we, the Surrey CB would be a massive part of the of doing it on behalf of their clubs that were entering it, and really the ROC would delegate it to Surrey to deal with. It's your clubs, and you'll know how best to deal with them. You'll know how good they are and where they should be. And once the decision is made, then by January time, February time, we'll be able to say this is what the leagues might look like next season, depending still on promotion relegation, which would be outstanding for the current number, and announce to the clubs what the league structure would look like for 25-26.
Yeah, and going back to what I referred to very early on in the on the call, bearing in mind that if 6 clubs, worst case scenario, did get relegated from regional 2s anyway, that could go to the very end of the season before clubs know anyway. So it wouldn't significantly change that, would it?
The 6 clubs being relegated is alarmist, and it's highly unlikely. But and you only have to quote it because it's sod's law. If you didn't tell clubs that something like that might happen, it's highly unlikely to happen. Everything would have to conspire against Surrey clubs in the regional leagues. It's not going to happen. So we'll be looking at a fairly normal change to the promotion relegation season.
Great. Thank you, Paul. Graham, you shared all those timelines.
So next steps will be we will make sure that chairs and onsecs of all eligible clubs will receive an email Tuesday or Wednesday next week with all the supporting documentation and a link to be able to vote with an explanation of what's expected as part of that vote. If there are any questions at any point, please come through to Ty, myself, any of the council reps, and we can help. I can help on the process in terms of kind of details on the, actually what's behind all of this. Please reach out to Ty and anyone.
Brick Tyson, who's our new Surrey ROC representative, replaced me on the London South East, will also be there to take any questions and point you in the right direction. Plus, the league secretaries for each of the leagues that you're in are also there to advise and support within those groups. So, thank you, everyone. Appreciate it's been already with the new registration and this. It's been the usual stop-starts to the season. But enjoy your week off this week for all those clubs who are in a 12-team and 10-team leagues already. After 2 rounds and 4 rounds, it's a week off, a rest week. And for those who are in a 14-team league, I believe you're still playing this week. So unless you've got something else to add regulation timeline-wise, Graham is going to call a halt to the meeting.
Sorry, just the other thing to add. I will, once I've downloaded all the recording and things, we'll make sure we share the recording out on that email next week as well, so that if anybody didn't make it or anyone wants to recap over what's been discussed tonight, you can.
Excellent. For those who want to leave, please do leave. Those who want to stay on and ask me any questions for the next 10 minutes, I'm happy to stay on and answer any questions about anything else, registration or league-wise, but we'll call a halt to the forum as it is now, and look forward to seeing you out and around the grounds and communicate with you via the various communication channels that Surrey have, and have a good season. And so the vote goes in the right way for what our Surrey clubs want and need. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks all.
My apologies to John Gimsdale.
Good night.